Alright, so instead of doing the motocross track on the Africa Twin next, I wound up finishing work a little bit early and figured I would do the dual sport, how to dual sport your, well, really any bike, but in my case a RM125. So we're going to start with what's required by the state. So for the state of Texas, you must have one mirror, one horn, one reflector, a tail light. It's a little hard to get. Brake light, if it's battery powered, has to run 20 minutes with the brake light held on. A headlight, which has to be on while you're operating the vehicle on roads. And brights. In my case, since I'm battery powered, I also have the system wired to have a running light. So we'll kind of start at the front and work our way back. So I decided to use one of those LED headlights off of Amazon. I actually have the full list of everything that was put onto this bike dual sport wise, with the website location and the cost breakdown and a few other options, which I'll put on the Facebook page at the link at the end of the video. But anywho, kind of when you're running everything off of a battery system, using LED is the way to go. You want to run a full LED setup. So, blinkers aren't required in Texas, but in your state, if they're required, make sure you have them front and back. And running LED saves a little bit of time and power. Everything on this bike is LED. So when you're running a battery system, you want to calculate out how many watt hours you've got, and you'll be able to divide that basically by how many watt hours being consumed on the bike. I can go into that explanation in the comment section if you want me to explain how long you can make a battery last. Let's just say the 6 amp hour drill battery I've got, full tilt will run the system 3 hours. Trying to conserve energy, I still have, it depends on the temperature and depends on, I guess a couple of other mitigating conditions. But I've had this last up to 7 hours with the minimum power draw. I guarantee you're not going to be able to take riding this bike on the street for 6-7 hours straight, but the option's there. And if you have a setup or a bike that's a little more street friendly, well, this might be your setup. So kind of go into the wiring. So one of the kind of the first RM125 particular struggles you're going to meet is the fact that your CDI box right there in the front, so you'll have reduced clearance. I went through 3 headlights trying to figure out how to get something that wouldn't break off when I was running it. So finally I went with this JFG headlight and a low profile LED bulb with a fan. And when you pick a headlight, make sure you look at your space considerations. It's very important, and keep you from wasting a lot of money sussing it out like I did. So it also helps to pick a light with these standoffs. Now here's kind of the problem. You're going to get 2 types of standoffs, a 1 inch and a 3 inch. Well, the 1 inch won't buy you enough room on the 125, and the 3 inch, the light will hang out so far that it's basically bumping and bouncing all around, and you can't get it to settle down. So what I did is I basically at the 2 inch mark drilled new mounting holes and attached it that way. So another thing is I run the Tusk dual Enduro kit. So there's a few things that aren't mentioned in the wiring diagram, which I'm also going to put into this video. And I'll have a link to be able to download the full dual sport items list and the wiring diagram. That'll help you out a lot trying to get this thing fully sussed out. It's going to save a lot of headache. So yeah, I know this wiring is a mess. This was just me still kind of experimenting with where everything was going to go. Eventually I plan to conduit it and tie it off, and this is precisely the reason why my wife makes fun of my wiring. It works, but it is rather ugly. So all the stuff on the TUS kit, your blinkers are going to snap into a space. Your grounds are both going to go to a double plug right here. Your hots are going to go to a pink wire, and then I believe the other hot goes to a light blue wire. That's all clear, easy to understand on the lighting diagram. As far as like your horn goes from the switch, that's very clear where that goes. Your blinker relay will be the blue and red wire to your blinker relay for LEDs, which you're going to need if you don't want to run incandescent bulbs. And the only reason you would want to run incandescent bulbs is if you have a stator that can support that sort of load. Running incandescent bulbs on this, I'd be drawing probably about 60 watts an hour, as opposed to I'm drawing at minimum about 2 watt hours. So all that's pretty easy to suss out. Your switch plugs into your switch area. I mean, it's kind of like square peg, square hole, round peg, round hole. Now this is where things get interesting, is when you start wiring the light. So on your lights, you're going to have three sets of wires generally. On some of them, black will be, the hot. On some of them, green. Most of your Amazon or eBay LED lights are going to have a blue and white that matches the blue and white off of your switch. Now here's kind of the deal, is this black wire, which will be your hot, will come from the switch. I know this is a little hard to mess around, but that hot is not going to work anywhere. I mean, you plug it right back into the battery. You can run it all the way back to the battery. That's a real nightmare. So what you end up doing with the black wire off of your switch after you attach the green wire to it, that is your constant hot to light. That's your constant power. If you have a fourth wire, you run it back to ground on the negative. Me, I tapped it into the blinker relay hot with a 2-to-1 tap, and that'll get you your headlight powered. So instead of sitting there for hours trying to figure out why isn't my headlight working, that's going to be the big crux of what's going to be difficult for you to figure out. And I've included a wiring diagram, pictures, and everything, which you'll see later. So another thing to bear in mind with the LED is if you don't have any sort of this is basically like a wattage regulator on it. It keeps it from having flicker. So if you get one of the cheaper lights, like this is a $12 one, but it's actually surprisingly good. I've torture tested it on dirt and in the rain on roads for about 3 months now. Hadn't even had it blink out once. But if you grab one that doesn't have a regulator on it, it's going to have a flickering effect. It's going to drive you a little bit nuts, and then you're going to have to wire in your own regulator. Save yourself a little trouble and find one with the regulator. Alrighty, all that aside, for my street setup, I kind of like to do things, let me look away from this for a second. I kind of like to do things official-like as much as possible.
One of my favorite apps for 2 minutes, and I have $5 worth.
Alright, so anyhow, so on my particular dual sport setup, I put on 2 mirrors. On a 2-stroke, this is going to vibrate like crazy, so the parts that come with it, as far as on the U-bolts, you're going to want to use used inner tubes or something rubber to absorb the shock. And honestly, it's really better to go with these longer ram mounts. It'll transfer less vibration to the mirror edge, and it'll drop down less. I just ordered a shorty, kind of not the best choice, but it works. The other thing that I do is, you'll notice on some of the newer phones, especially like the iPhone products, you have servos and all sorts of fancy stuff on your $1,000 phone. Now in Texas, you're not required to have a speedometer, but I go ahead and use one based off of phone GPS. You don't have to have service on it. The program I use is DigiHUD. And this is actually a pretty accurate speedometer. I've tested it against the Africa Twin speedometer. I've tested it against the CRF 250L and DR 650. It's accurate to within 2 miles per hour. And it'll work even when you don't have GPS signal. And it's readily, easily visible. You can see it at night. It was actually on the Knight Rider episode or video. So if you don't want to spend the money on $120 plus for a trail tech, just grab one of these off of eBay. And you can use like the Kyocera Active or any old Samsung Active, fully waterproof, as long as you close the charging port. I can run this downpour just fine. You look for a used IP68 phone. Just a little tip and trick to help you out with a little bit of, I guess, rigging a speedometer. I'm not sure if this will work in states that require a speedometer. It might. So you go ahead and give it a try. The other thing that I added was the Tusk brake switch. I put one on the front and back so it actuates it front and back. And one of the things to kind of bear in mind when you're putting these on, sometimes the wires will get a little bit frayed. I go ahead and add a bit of tape and a bit of epoxy to make the connection point a little bit stronger and a little bit more well protected. And that goes straight into your switch. Basically that will go straight into on your wiring diagram. Where are we at? Straight into the blinker relay switch. So just follow the wiring diagram on Tusk. You can make your own if you want, but I would say it's a bit more work than it's worth. So we got the front end handled. That's basically half of the battle. But there's a little bit more. So forgive me, this is going to be a bit MacGyver-ish. If your bike doesn't come with a battery or stator, necessity is a mother of invention. So this is what I ended up doing. I know this looks terrible, but bear with me here. So most of these old motocross bikes don't have a wide open flat spot on the bottom of the seat. So what I ended up doing was I used RTV sealant, like the black gasket maker. And then I filled it in, found an old AOL CD and put it there, and then used 3M lock to hold it in place. Now this will be just enough for the road, or light trail use like Jeeps or dirt roads and stuff of the like. The second you start hitting jumps, this battery will jettison into your air box. So that's why I use this $2 Amazon packing strap. And you don't even notice it when you're riding. It's nice and flat. Holds the battery in place. So what we have right here is a Chinese knockoff Milwaukee 18 volt battery. It's 6 amp hours, and it comes out roughly when you test it to about 5.4, but still quite a bit of power under the hood. I've included the link for this custom 3D printed loom, and they have tons of these on eBay. Plugs right into your Milwaukee, and then you just wire it in. Now here comes an interesting part of the whole deal if you're using LEDs. So most of your LEDs you'll notice are running 12 volts. What is my battery? My battery is 18 volt. So the first time I did this setup I didn't have what was called a step down. And all of my LEDs sizzled and fried. So when it says 12 volts, reduce it down to 12 volts. You'll run your power into the converter, DC-DC converter, which I have a link to this. This thing's been great. The volt range will be anything from 40 to 15 volts, and it'll just toss it out at 12 volts at 60 watts, 5 amps. That'll be more than enough to run any sort of dual sport kit. There's other ones that have different ratings. Pay attention that you get the right rating for your dual sport kit. So basically, at that point, on your Tusk wiring setup, you'll do it the same way you would have the test battery in there. But instead of having 1 amp hour, you got 6 times the amount of life. And the test battery is around $120. This whole setup right here, all together is about $50. You get 6 times the life for, a little less than half the cost. I think that's a pretty good trade-off. So you'll notice I have a few of these wires tapped back. So my running light, you have the live side. You're going to run that back and tap it to basically your live side of your or your ground, or the ground side of it. You're going to tap back to the ground, and the live side you're going to tap to the live. There's a couple of items in here that require that you tap back to ground, so you'll notice I have these 2-in-1 tap connectors. If you don't want to do the running light, that's fine. It just is a great way to save power. So, as I said, I know this thing's kind of a mess. So you have your inline fuse. You've got your negative, which you'll just wire into the loom like the regular Tuss loom. This is where you would normally put the battery. And then for your rear light, it's a 3-pin connector. It doesn't fit anywhere else. As I said, the rest of this is very self-explanatory. This is the hot side of your turn signals. Your ground side of turn signals is always going to be one of these double clip connectors. My advice to you is if you use an off-brand turn signal, take a set of pliers and crimp these down a bit more. They'll constantly pop out if you don't. So right here, this right here goes down to my other Tusk brake switch, which is a little bit hidden right now. Let me pause the video and open this up for you a bit. Alright, we're back. Now this is another RM125 centric issue. Now your bike might or might not have this issue. So where you have the brake reservoir on the RM125, it directly interferes with where your bolt is. So when you're bolting on a new switch or a new brake line, you've got to take this whole assembly off and move it out. But then you run into the problem, alright, I've got my brand new fancy Tusk switch and my brake reservoir is in the way. So I went up to Home Depot and got a U-bolt, and then the steel plate that comes with the U-bolt offsets it by about an inch. It's like 18-cent fix. You use a bolt, a Nylock bolt on the other side, and then your old screw, offset it by about an inch. Still mostly protected by your guard. I've never had an issue with it. Just a helpful tip for when you're dealing with an RM125 specific issue. Now, I don't know if this is an issue on your bike. This will be something that you've got to suss out. Then again, I'm more than willing to help suss out ideas. If you send me pictures on Facebook or contact me with an email at stoplogic, STOPLOGIC1313 @gmail.com, or on the StopLogic YouTube channel. I know there's a lot of dirt and stuff here. I actually spilled a bit of a Premix on the bike. So I know this is a bit much right here, but it'll be a bit clearer whenever you see the actual wiring diagram. And then I actually already got my Texas plate, but right now I'm waiting for 30 days to see if my title gets contested by the state of Texas. If it does, then I've got to go through the bonded title process, and I'll walk you guys through it. Now, another thing to bear in mind, in the state of Texas, you have to have a light that has a license plate light. The Tusk setup is really good for this. It's about a $30 assembly, and it comes with a license plate light. A lot of the China lights that you get off of eBay don't have the license plate light. And believe me, Texas Finest will make you painfully aware of that fact if you don't have it. Kind of something that's a little bit helpful when using one of these, because I've broken plates on the on setups before, is you'll notice I use a lot of cut-off inner tube. So I use cut-off inner tube as a gasket on where you have the reflectors at, and then below the plate. This will reduce the amount of vibrations and how many plates are going to break off on the whatever highway you happen to be on. So that's a very helpful little bit of information right there. That's one thing I've learned the hard way with 3 different sets of plates. So you wonder, man, this looks a little schlocky. Why did you go with this particular setup? I wanted to still be able to pull off my seat regularly. There's another video out there, and the video escapes me, where they actually epoxied in the wiring harness to the seat. yeah, that's an option, and it probably won't go anywhere, and you don't have to use the Amazon strap and look even a little more, MacGyver-ish. But I wanted something that was fully removable, somewhat adjustable. If I don't have the battery in there and decide I'm just going to ride day track, I can flip this around and attach it to my 3M adhesive. These 3M strips are actually pretty strong. So, these Amazon packing straps kind of give the bike a little bit of an old school vibe, like how you'd have a mid-90s KDX or something of that nature. Well, let me rotate my strap around a little bit. It's getting a little bit picky here. The other great part about these Amazon packing straps is that they're so thin, you don't barely notice them. I mean, you don't notice this riding at all. Now, if you try and lift the bike with it, yeah, you're not gonna succeed at that endeavor. So, also it has enough flex that when you put the seat down, it doesn't interfere with the battery. This is another RM125 centric issue, is whatever you have under the seat, I know the battery is a little big, so you'll see this little seat latch there. You gotta basically bend and force the seat into place. And it takes a little stabbing. But once you get it locked down in the middle, if you don't get it locked down in the middle, you're gonna have a really weird sensation when you're riding. Everything's gonna feel slightly out of place. So there's a lot of little challenges to this bike that make it particularly interesting to dual sport. And once you have it down, yeah, it seems like there's a little bit of flex in the seat, but once you have it down, you don't notice anything about it. So the only other things to note on this bike that you might want to do for dual sporting is the Ricochet kickstand. That's about $120. You can live without it if you can lean up against something, or if you carry your motocross angle. Now, the downside about these Ricochets is that from wherever they get them, they're cut really long. Bike will stand straight up. If you got a friend that welds, chop a ½ inch off of it, re-weld the foot. Also, don't try and get on the bike with it, in place and down. You'll bend the swing arm. Another thing in mind is you'll want to wrap a little extra inner tube on it so it doesn't rub and damage the swing arm as you're riding it. Now, when it comes to street gearing on this RM125, so another RM125 centric thing, is I'm running a 46 tooth sprocket in the back, and I'm running a 13 up front. So I get about a top speed of about 70 miles an hour, which is full tilt. I can cruise at 55, 60. Not great for Texas roads, but Texas back roads, not too bad. Another thing that I run in my tires, since it's really hard to balance a tire with rim locks, is I run that ride-on sealant. Now, I use the word sealant loosely. It's balance and sealant. It's a much better balancer than it is sealant. But it'll tame that front end for you. The first time you hop on the road on one of these, and you don't have any sort of balance or any sort of item in it, it'll shake to the point where you're absolutely terrified on the bike. If you've ever ridden a street bike at any speed, magnify that by about 2 times, because a regular street bike could be 300-400 pounds, sometimes 5-6, depending. So that shake's just going to be kind of like a annoying oscillation. On a 181 pound dirt bike, that shake is a terrifying action thriller. So, just a couple of things to bear in mind when you're dealing with using one of these. Now, the other question you'll ask is, okay, you got a 2-stroke, you got a Premix. Carry a baby bottle with you with your 2-stroke oil. You can usually get about 2 tanks out of a baby bottle. This bike has a natural range of about 50 miles on 1 tank. You carry a baby bottle on you with your 2-stroke oil, and you can run just about anything in this. I personally run Yamalube or Lucas because it's readily available and moderately cheap. You'll be able to get 2 full tanks out of that. When you're filling up, always make sure you shut your petcock off so you don't get any fuel straight to the carburetor with no premix in it. That'll be a great way to torch your top end. But honestly, this thing is actually quite a bit of fun on the street. I see people supermoto these and regularly walk away from DRZ 400s on track videos. I mean, it's definitely got to get up and go, and you'll get up and go relatively quickly. But at any rate, thanks for hanging in there. Like and subscribe if you like what you see, and make sure you visit the Stop Logic Motorsports Facebook for the part list and the in-depth wiring diagram. And I'll see you hopefully soon on this beast at Murphy's MX. Have a great day. You know, I just realized there was one other thing I forgot to mention. One other thing they're going to look for is the dot rating on your tires. Now, one more RM125 specific problem is, or any bike with a 19-inch rear tire, is there's only 2 dot knobby choices that you can fit on here. The Kenda K670, and there's a Michelin AC10. I believe that's the part number on it. And I use the K70 or 760 because it performs well in just about any condition, and honestly, it's, you know, $40. So I have, it's cheap enough that you can just toss a new one on the second your leading edge goes bad. I figured I would just add that little tidbit in.